Oh, giddy up, giddy up, giddy up, giddy up. Hello, Pat.
Hey, what's up, man?
You know what, dude? It's funny because tonight's guest. I'm very excited to have him on. And before we bring him out, I was going through. I haven't been in the host seat for quite some time because of my job editing and other things. You know, sometimes you got to step back and kind of hit a reset. Not everybody can do 9 shows a week like you can, Pat. But when I was thinking about when we're having this guest on, I'm like, who can I have as my co-pilot, right? There's not a lot of people out there that you can have with this guy because, a lot of times when you put the label on a person like we have tonight, it's like, oh, my God, well, we're going to talk about blah, 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 blah. And I tell you what, it's going to be a fucking great show, ain't it?
Absolutely, 100%, man. Yeah. Ben's a great guy.
It is. And I tell you what, it's going to be a great show because tonight's guest is not only the deputy editor or one of the deputy editors for Skeptical Inquirer Science magazine. He's also written thousands, and we're talking thousands of articles here, from everything from urban legends to political science to mysterious phenomena. And tonight's topic, of course, we're going to talk about Bigfoot. And if that's not enough, in his downtime, all he does is write books and wins dozens of awards for his podcasts, his movies, his live shows. I tell you what, it's going to be a good show because you know what? Tonight's guest is none other than Benjamin Radford, and this is From Behind Tall Trees. Deep in the forests of North America, a creature is said to exist. A creature that people are encountering. With far too many reports to ignore, there are elements of truth behind these accounts that mankind can no longer ignore.
Breaking news out of Texas, Bigfoot is real.
Could a breeding population of large, upright, hairy hominids really exist in North America? Or is there something more paranormal at work here, deep in the woods? If just one footprint, one wood knock, or one howl is real, then man's understanding of primate evolution would be changed forever. Join the Catskill Appalachian Research Collective as they delve further into the mysteries of Bigfoot and other paranormal phenomena through the eyes of witnesses, investigators, critics, and skeptics. Join us as we look to discover what lurks from behind tall trees. Look at that. At the top of the show, Pat's already stepping outside to have a cigarette break. Good evening, Benjamin, and thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. It's good to talk to you.
I see that Bigfoot Benjamin.
Yeah, I figure, mix it up a little bit, have some fun with it. So if Pat can be Squatch Talk, then I'll do Bigfoot Benjamin.
Yeah, and I'm just B's, just straight up B as in boring.
No, not at all.
I wouldn't say that.
How is everything? You just moments before the show. How is everything in the world of Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad?
Nope. No spoilers. I haven't seen the last
spoilers.
episode.
Okay, I promise no spoilers. No, yeah. Things are going pretty well out here in New Mexico. Most of the fires, some of which were unfortunately set by the Forest Service a while back, are mostly out. We are coming out of a heat wave and a bit of a drought, but a lot of the states is. So it's we're doing okay.
We haven't, I live in the Catskills in upstate New York, and it hasn't rained here. We've gotten a little drizzle here, but we have not seen serious rain in months, And by the Farmer's Almanac, it was supposed to be a wet summer, right? That old Farmer's Almanac, and that shows you how accurate that thing is. So let's jump right into it, right? Yeah. Let's get going because a lot of people when we were talking about this is the From Behind Tall Trees. Everybody, welcome aboard. And we were talking about this just slightly before the show, and Pat made a good point. Is let's not use up all the good fodder before we get on board.
Do the show before the show. Yeah.
And you are a very, very right down the middle of the road skeptic, right? So, but skeptics to a lot of people in the Bigfoot community also equals bully. Right. And that's not it is, if you think about it, right? They're like, well, if you don't believe in Bigfoot throwing rocks at me, you must be a bully. What do you think? First of all, explain to everybody that maybe the people that don't know you more about the Science magazine and what you've been up to as far as your work within the skeptical community.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, well, as you mentioned, I am a research fellow with the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry, and it's a nonprofit educational organization, actually not too far from where you are, based in Amherst in Buffalo, New York. And I've been there for 20 some years now. I've been there, it seems like forever, and doing stuff for the magazine and so on. But part of my job there is an investigator. So even though sort of my day job is somewhat more mundane, it's, you know, correcting grammar and making sure that sentences have verbs and, you know, things like that. I also investigate things, and I've done that for again over 20 years. And cryptozoology was one of my first passions. You know, I'm known for investigating a couple things. I did a book called Tracking Chupacabra. Got a Chupacabra t-shirt on. I co-authored a book on lake monsters with Joe Nickel. And things like that. But that's what always been fascinating me was cryptozoology, because unlike, for example, ghosts or aliens or psychic powers or predictions, whatever else, if these things are real, if these animals are real, Bigfoot, Nessie, Chupacabra, Mothman, whatever, then there should be good evidence for them, right? There should be bones, there should be live ones, there should be dead ones, there should be, if it's something that's tangible, then they should be out there somewhere. And so that made it more interesting to me as an investigator, because it meant that I or you or one of the people, someone in the audience might, if we work hard enough, we look long enough, we might actually find one. So that's what intrigued me. And so that's always my goal is, you know, even though, as you mentioned, I am a skeptic and I don't mind that label. Mm-hmm. A lot of people don't really know what a skeptic is. I mean, even to this day, right? People, what's a skeptic? Do you doubt everything?
Well, that's the thing is, I think they call a skeptic a hater, right? A lot of people, they say they view the word skeptic or skeptical as a bully or a hater or a very negative person within these communities that we're talking about tonight.
Yeah, and honestly, I've never really understood that. I mean, certainly in the skeptics community, there are people who are abrasive. I mean, as there in every community. I mean, it's for example, Penn and Teller would be considered skeptics, and of course, they had a show series called Bullshit, where they called people, everything in the book plus bullshit. The amazing Randy, investigator and a friend of mine, died recently. He was, of course, pioneering, doing all sorts of stuff. But when it comes to investigations, I and some of my colleagues, Joe Nickel and Kenny Biddle and others, one of the things we try to bring it respectfully, and especially me, because I have a degree in psychology, and I'm very aware of the ways in which people can misunderstand things and misperceive things. And that's not to say that people are stupid or crazy or whatever else. It's just to say that I myself have experienced things that I couldn't understand at the time, but I later sort of pieced together what it was. And so I'm actually pretty sympathetic to people. And so I'll just give you one quick example. Mm-hmm. I was invited by Jeff Meldrum to speak at a Bigfoot conference in Pocatello, Idaho. This is maybe 15 years ago. And I appreciated the invitation, and I met Jeff, and he's a nice enough guy. I mean, I have some issues with some of his work, but other than that, he's a nice enough guy. But I was on stage in front of literally a giant room full of Bigfoot believers, and thankfully nobody threw Bigfoot scat or tomatoes at me. But
they were fucking stink eyeing you.
I know I was getting the stink eye, and frankly, I'm like, if you got some Bigfoot scat, hold on to it. Don't throw it at me. But I was like, look, here's the thing. I said, and I'm addressing the audience. I said, look, I'm here to listen to you. So, like, yes, I'm a skeptic. Yes, I have reasons that I personally suspect that Bigfoot probably doesn't exist, and I'm happy to discuss them. But here's the difference. I said, unlike most people out there, most people walking the streets of Boston, Albuquerque, Buffalo, whatever else, a lot of people think that anybody that believes in Bigfoot is crazy and full of shit. I said, I don't. I will listen to you. If you have evidence, show me your evidence. I'm not going to laugh in your face. I'm not going to walk away. I will look at the evidence you offer. If you tell me you have some experience, I will listen to your experience and I will investigate it to the extent that I can. So I said, look, ultimately, I believe we're on the same page. Our goal is the same. So the ultimate goal should be to prove whether or not these things exist or not. Mm-hmm. So I said, we're on the same side here. It's like I may have a higher standard of evidence than you do, but I'm not here at the Bigfoot conference, and I'm not here on your show right now to debunk or disprove or to pour cold water on Bigfoot, because I got better things to do with my time. If I was absolutely certain that Bigfoot didn't exist, if I was absolutely certain that anybody that believes in Bigfoot is full of shit and crazy, I wouldn't waste my time. So my point here is, let's examine the evidence, but again, it has to be good evidence if we're gonna move forward.
I've read in a couple of your articles that there's four for you and for a scientific method. There's 4 types of evidence that you consider. Correct? Is that an accurate assumption?
Well, in Bigfoot specifically?
Well, I think it was the 50 years of Bigfoot article. I think
Yeah. So I mean, obviously, in each case, as you know, I investigate a wide variety of claims. So I investigate crop circles, I investigate psychics, I investigate all sorts of things.
I love the crazy clowns one too. That's a great one.
I did a book on evil clowns. That's right.
I write a fucking book on everything, dude.
I lead an interesting life. But yeah, in the case of Bigfoot, so we're talking photographic evidence, we're talking somatic samples, and of course there's Bigfoot sound. I mean, there's lots of different types. They sort of fall under the categories of footprints, samples like hair samples and that sort of thing. So yeah,
right. So now as far as and I had a hard time trying to catch up with all the books and all the articles that you read, but I've also found that and we're already getting it. So we've already got a Facebook user here putting a post up. Is not to burst anybody's bubble, but it's all real, right? So now we already got somebody, which there's already people feeling backed into the corner, and I appreciate everybody making the comments, but there's a perfect example of, you know what, fuck you, I saw it, it's real, right? And I have not seen one. Have you had any, and we can go outside the Bigfoot corner here for a while.
So much to unpack here, man. Got it.
Yeah, Ben, have you seen anything in your adventures, whether it be sea monsters, Mothman, Chupacabra? What have you seen anything that you go, wow, man, I got to reinvestigate or reevaluate all this stuff?
I have to some extent. Usually in the cases where I'm like, hold on, what the hell is going on here? Usually, because part of it is I'm skeptical of my own credulity, right? And so when I tell people that eyewitnesses can be mistaken, not only is that factually true, I mean, talk to any psychologist, I'm including myself. So this is important to point out. It's like when I'm telling people eyewitnesses, can be wrong. There's lots of studies, lots of research. We don't always remember things perfectly. We don't always recount things perfectly. I'm not pointing the finger saying you're an idiot, you can't remember anything. I'm saying we're all human. We all have the same hardwired brains, and it's a simple fact that not everything's there. And so I guess that partly answers your question, because if I see something that I don't recognize, my assumption is not, which is an assumption I've often heard from Bigfoot believers, from ghost hunters, or else. My assumption is not that this is unknown, no one else can explain this. My assumption is, well, this is weird, I can't figure it out, but just because I can't figure it out doesn't mean that no one else knows what it is.
Right.
So that's sort of the basis underlying it. So, I mean, one time I saw a UFO over Albuquerque where I live. I later on figured out what it was. It was actually an optical illusion. I mean, I've been camping and heard deep guttural things that I didn't think were an ordinary animal, but I didn't say, well, it must be Bigfoot. I said, I don't know what it is. I'm not perfect. I'm not omniscient. All I can say is I don't know what it is.
Okay. And fair enough. And I think there's an important point to unpack there. There's all kinds of stuff to unpack, but this is a very important point, which is that number one, there's a difference. We have an online community of Bigfoot entertainment enthusiasts, fascinated with it, crazy people. I mean, just like any online community, like Flat Earth,
sure,
like even like true crime. The true crime online community is out of their freaking minds, dude. Because all they do is hyper speculate. This guy did that, but he got away with it. But it was this guy, and that has real world consequences. Maybe
you're absolutely right. No, good analogy.
Yeah, and it'll never solve one crime ever. You know,
Sure.
I doubt it.
On rare occasions, but yeah, usually.
Yeah, it would be extremely rare.
Yeah, and I mean, there's so many
So-
Jack the Ripper, Facebook groups. No one's going to solve Jack the Ripper if just enough people
exactly,
give
or
their 10 cents.
or DB Cooper or any of that
exactly.
stuff. So we have online communities that do the same crap everywhere. The Bigfoot community is no different online.
Sure.
Right.
There's-
You're right.
We have to separate the people who have encounters that claim encounters. Yes, a lot of that they might be online giving their encounters, and they might even participate in the Bigfoot world, but I separate those two things. The online community being afraid of skeptics, like I don't like, that's a whole different ballgame than people who have encounters. Therefore, we get to the part of, what's going on with the encounters. And that's a different thing. So that's not, that becomes two different things to talk about, so which road do we want to go down?
Yeah, that's a perfect point. You were talking about the UFO sighting, and I had about 6 months ago, it was actually it was almost a year, I had what I thought was a UFO sighting, and I was very excited about it, and I filmed it, and to me, it had all the telltale signs of I don't know what the hell this thing is, and I sent it off to a guy from MUFON. He did the research, and fortunately, he sent me back. There was the way the jet was traveling, the noise didn't come because it was directed towards me, and he showed me the track, and the mystery was solved. It ended up being a small private jet that just happened to be going this way, and you couldn't hear the sound. So I would much rather get that information back and know that, you know what, I'm not mad because it wasn't a
Yeah,
UFO, right? I was a little, because I was like, the experience alone was well worth it, because I was like, holy, this could be a UFO.
Natural for everybody. Whenever somebody sees something that they can't explain, if somebody comes back and gives them an explanation, I think they're all too happy to have it explained.
Here's the thing: it depends on what it is.
Street, right?
Well, and actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that's part of the sort of unrecognized or under-recognized role that skeptics have. Is my position is that it's to everyone's benefit, especially the Bigfoot community, to sort out the bullshit from the real, to sort out the hoaxers and the possible sighting of else. But unfortunately, one thing that I found, and we can get into this later, is that there is an inability or unwillingness by people and leaders in the Bigfoot community to do that. Part of it is because they don't want to cast stones. They don't want to say, your research is shit, mine is good. And one thing that happens, and you guys know this as well as I do, is that known hoaxers and strongly suspected hoaxers are lumped together with people who, and I see people, even, I'm not going to name any names, but, every now and then I'll see, look at all the speakers in this Bigfoot conference. I'm like, two of these guys are like known hoaxers, right? Like, what are the rest of you doing? What are you doing, Jeff? Why are you on this program with this dude who we all know is a hoaxer? This is, no one is making an effort to weed those people out, and it shouldn't be skeptics' job to do that.
And that's true.
I do my best, man. I try my best, but I'm a small voice because entertainment sells, dude.
Right? No, I agree.
And I want you to define leaders, like just define. Don't give me names, but
give us names. Name names. That's what this show's about. Throwing stones and naming names.
Well, no, I mean, and this is part of the problem, is that there's no overarching authority. It's the same thing with UFOs and MUFON, right? I mean, whatever the topic is, we can name, or certainly I can name, a half dozen top, often self-proclaimed leaders, right? The guys on Expedition, and Finding Bigfoot, this and that and the other, and we've got Matt Moneymaker, and you got all these other people, and all they're in their little different categories and silos. And the same thing with UFOs. Sure. You have some of the experiencers, you have some of the researchers, and you have a much smaller subsection of skeptics. And by skeptics, I mean people who are knowledgeable about it. And this sort of gets back to, just to return very quickly to what we started with, is when skeptics get a bad name, oftentimes it may be like some friend of theirs who says, I don't believe it, you're full of it. And so just somebody doubting them isn't necessarily an informed skeptic, such as myself, or and there's others as well, Dave Dagling, Dan Locks and others, Sharon Hill, people who have followed the community for years, in some cases decades. The late Michael Dennett, who was a great friend of mine, he died a while back, unfortunately, and he did some great work publishing about some of the Bigfoot hoaxes. So the number of people that are genuine, actual, true skeptics, that is, people who are informed about the topic and can speak knowledgeably about it, is relatively small. So those people shouldn't be confused with any random person who thinks that a sighting is bullshit.
You have, and I would jump in, but it's funny, as I've been doing this show for a couple of years now, and that's the first time that connection has been made during the show. Is yes, you do. It's unfortunate you have the bullshitters and the hoaxers, unfortunately, do get lumped in there with the entertainment, which and the people that see, this people that saw something they really can't understand. And there's a lot of people that I don't do a lot of conventions, but when I do, sometimes you talk to somebody and you can see it's genuine. They're really confused with what they saw. They're not willing to push the Bigfoot button right away, but they don't want to be lumped in there with the entertainment that is now shows like Expedition Bigfoot. Because let's be honest, that is strictly entertainment. And there's nothing wrong with that, just like finding Bigfoot, that was entertainment value. But it is unfortunate that people they do get kind of lumped into this melange of, like this Bigfoot paella.
Yeah, no, that's paella. I hadn't heard that. I love that. I'm going to use that.
Yeah,
paella.
Yeah, it's there's a million variables to a lot of these different things, but yeah. I mean, that's why I use the word skeptic. I refer to myself as a skeptic in the Bigfoot world, exploring the phenomena, trying to investigate to some degree, and things like that. I openly use that word just to try and offset some of that skeptic capital S stuff. I mean, I have a whole show dedicated to Squatch Talk.
Yeah,
right?
well, I mean. The other thing to keep in mind is that, it's fashionable for believers, and I'm not pointing a finger at you, but it's fashionable for believers to call them skeptics, to call themselves skeptics. So, for example, the ghost hunter guys, right? Jason and Grant, who, were spent 11 seasons not finding ghosts. They call themselves skeptics. I have their books. They're like, whoa, we're skeptical. I'm like, are you?
So do you think it's fashionable? Do you think it's fashionable for them to call themselves skeptics, to give them sort of street cred?
I think it is. And so here's the thing, right? Is it if a ghost hunter investigates something, and I wrote a book titled Investigating Ghosts, and so I talk a lot about that in that book. But so what happens is that if a ghost hunting group finds a reasonable explanation for some mysterious sound or light or whatever else, they're like, well, see, we're skeptical. We found the explanation. Like, yeah, anybody could have done that. But then in the same breath, they're like, okay, well, we found we heard these 4 sounds while we're listening in this haunted place for 8 hours, and we found explanations for these 2, but not these 2, and therefore there's ghosts. I'm like, no, that's not how that works. All you can say is that you had 4 mysterious sounds. You found explanations for 2 of them, and you didn't find explanations for the other 2. That could be because there is no explanation. It could be because they were ghosts. Could be because you're inept investigators. There's any number of reasons why those other 2 could have remained unsolved, and that same principle applies to Bigfoot research as well, where if you have some DNA sample that is unknown or comes back too degraded,
awesome, right?
You guys know this, right? It's like, unknown does not mean Bigfoot. All it means is that it didn't match whatever samples you put into it.
Yeah, and that's DNA is 1,000 times more complicated than even that,
Right.
So and a lot of people in the Bigfoot world don't understand that. And you actually have to do some research to kind of even like scratch the surface of how DNA works.
Well, and then there's that whole Melba Ketchum fiasco.
Yeah, and yes,
I mean, God, this is just such. On my podcast, Squaring the Strange, we recently interviewed Sharon Hill talking about, and I remember I covered the Melba Ketchum DNA.
It was a big deal. It was a big deal.
It was a huge deal. I wrote about it for Discovery News,
Right.
And all along, I'm seeing this. I was actually getting calls from news outlets. They're like, "Hey, Mr. Radford, you're a noted, credentialed Bigfoot skeptic." And it's like, what do you think about this Melba Ketchum DNA stuff?
On the record, right?
I'm like, there's nothing here. It's like I said, look, I'm not trying to be mean. I've never met the woman, but I said there's all sorts of red flags, including the fact that she had to create her own journal to publish her own stuff.
Yeah.
But I'm like, look, and they're like, "Are you going to fly out for the press conference?" I'm like, "No, I know exactly where this is going to go." I mean, and sure enough, and that's another example where you had this high profile, Bigfoot DNA, in fact, it's even in the intro, as you know, and it's like it turned out to be a big nothing burger and an embarrassment, and yet Ketchum is still around, and people are still talking about her, and I'm like,
very few.
Yeah, but it took forever. I mean,
to the community's credit, the Bigfoot community pretty much whole percentage wise, the vast majority of people in the Bigfoot world rejected that as well.
Now that was 2014. Was that 2014?
I think
roughly
it was around then. Okay, and I mean, I'm glad they finally came around to that. But meanwhile, a lot of people piled on there, and you still have other people. I'm not going to name names, but Todd Standing, who are like, "Come on, man! I mean,
big name,
really?
Yeah.
I mean, and again, I'm not trying to call anybody out or make any enemies here, but I mean, come on, the Bigfoot community should be doing more than skeptics are to weed out the bullshit. Come on.
Well, I agree, but the Bigfoot community, again, just like other communities, the vast majority of them are very casual. So they're not like you and me or Brendon here, like, that we'll go deep into it and go the extra mile or whatever. It's very casual. And what I'm saying to you is the casual people rejected that because, for a lot of different reasons, like it wasn't the answer they wanted. It wasn't like it's something that didn't feel right about it. Like it wasn't believable. It wasn't sexy at all.
Yeah, but there's a lot of
people
it
as hard science. I mean, that was Ketch's thing.
Right.
She's like, this is DNA, hard science.
And see, there's the disconnect. She hit the worst, like the rotten sweet spot, because the casual people don't care about hard science, and the hard science people immediately recognize it as bullshit. So,
well, that's Politis. Politis is stirring the pot there, right? Politis has been he's had his foot in all these things, as far as he started that whole mess with Isidol and the Bluff Creek massacre with MK Davis. He had his finger in that with Bobby Ford, and then backed out. And the same thing with this,
Matthew Johnson. I mean, he was in on Melba Ketchum. I mean, he wrote this rambling 4-page thing defending. I'm like, come on, man. It's like you just I mean, shoot yourself in the foot, dude. But I'm just, come on.
Matthew Johnson shooting himself in the foot. What? How dare you? I'm
Dr.
going to
Matthew Johnson
now, sir.
Oh God! Don't get Stroyford started with him, man.
Yeah.
Well,
I love you, Steve.
I'll just add one other quick thing is that I used to be on Crypto Mundo long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
So I posted there, and I think so did Matt Crowley and a couple other skeptics. And I'll be honest with you, I know we started the show talking about skeptics' role in that, and I got tired of the abuse because I would post stuff that was not hostile. I was obviously, someone posts something about the Minnesota Iceman or tracks or dermal ridges, and I would very legitimately and politely offer other evidence, and I'll get piled on. And every now and then, somebody would say, "Hey, give Ben a break," or whatever else. But finally, I'm like, I don't need this shit. I'm trying to help you guys, and I would get piled on for just pointing out basic, simple facts. I'm like, I don't need this. You guys,
Walk
sink your
away.
own boat.
Now you're talking about I think you're talking about some of the Freeman prints had some dermal ridges, right? That were
Did they?
instead it was dermal ridges. But I think when you brought in people like I think George Bonebreak and Robert Olson, right? They said, "Hey, listen, we can't tell if this is a person with a big foot or there's no conclusive evidence here that says it's a Bigfoot with dermal ridges."
Right. Well, there's
right?
a couple things, right? I mean, so you can look at some.
Why don't we back up for a second and reset that story,
Sure. Okay.
Ben, and tell that story right there from the beginning about the print with the dermal ridges for those who don't know.
Yeah, it's sort of a rabbit hole. I don't want to go too deep into
it.
Just
give us the 10 points.
Sure. So basically, some of the tracks that were found, including by Freeman, were alleged to have basically dermal ridges or fingerprints, except of course on feet.
Mm-hmm.
And this was considered to be evidence that these tracks are authentic, because the argument was no hoaxer could have even thought to put fingerprints and toe prints on a hoax. I mean, it's just that it would be such a involved thing for somebody to hoax that it's implausible that it could be done.
And this is back in the 80s, right? This is 86, right?
Exactly. This is in the 80s, and so this was part of the story. And then other people were looking at it like, well, hold on, this isn't quite right here. And so some people suspected that in fact the so-called Bigfoot fingerprints or toe prints, the dermal ridges, were not those at all, and they were artifacts of the casting. And so you had people like Matt Crowley, Anton Rulebsky, and Mike Den and others who were looking into it. And so they're saying, guys, these fingerprints, these toe prints that you're saying are basically conclusive, hardcore evidence that these are real, aren't there. And then you had a police officer, Jimmy Chilcutt.
Oh God, what was with that guy?
Well, Jimmy Chilcutt came out and said, "Hey, I'm a police forensics guy. I have all these credentials. I know what I'm talking about. Don't question me. I did all this research for the state police, blah, blah, blah." And he authenticated them.
Above reproach, right? He was above reproach, best in the world.
He was above reproach. And you saw the same sort of thing with Grover Krantz to some extent. You had these people who were like, don't mess with me. I'm credentialed. And the thing is that in the Bigfoot world, the number of people that are genuinely credentialed is minuscule. Like there's Jeff Meldrum and a couple others, but that's basically it. And even Meldrum, his expertise is not in Bigfoot, with all due respect. I'm not saying he doesn't know anything about Bigfoot, but that is literally not his field of expertise. I mean, you can sort of wedge it in there, but the point here is that you had these so-called really stellar evidence, and then you get this authenticated by a police forensics expert, and the whole thing turned out to be bullshit. It was exactly what the skeptic said it was, which was dermal artifacts, and you could prove this by doing it yourself, depending on the substrate and the casting materials.
And I think there's such a rush to judgment with a lot of this evidence. It's like, oh my God, we got Jimmy Chilcutt. It's nothing. It's the best in the world. And it's on Monster Quest and it's got to be real. Everybody's such a, and this is not, nobody wants Bigfoot to be real. I'm one of those guys, and I'm an optimistic, right? But I haven't seen anything that leads me down that road yet. I wouldn't be investigating if I didn't think the possibility was there, right? But I'm not going to rush to judgment. And I think there's a big rush to judgment sometimes when we have motions like that and moments like that, where people are like, oh my God, this could be real. It's in they have it in a fucking freezer. There we go. I listened to episode 140 of Scaring the Strange, and poor Steve Coles, dude. I wanted to get him on the show with us tonight, but it's just too late last minute to reiterate that story. But again, it's like somebody has to dot the I's and cross the T's to go along the way to make sure that these charlatans aren't getting away with things. Otherwise, it's the Wild West. I mean, it's already the Wild West.
It is, and that's one reason why I respect people like Steve. I mean, Steve is obviously more of a believer than I am, but that's fine. I mean, you're more. I mean, I don't have a thing against believers. I really don't. That I'm on your show. I mean, I'm happy to talk to them and discuss evidence. All I ask is that they be open to the possibility that maybe,
of course,
maybe something I'm saying is
be prepared for disappointment.
Right, exactly.
You have to be prepared for disappointment.
I mean,
and I'm
again,
okay with that.
If we're talking about this event, that event, or that like a handful of events that could be debunked, I mean, hell, I've done that myself. I take part in the debunking of this thing. I have a whole series of shows called, it's what is it? Hell, what do I call it? It
3-minute video.
It's your own show, dude.
No. Things that are not Bigfoot.
Okay.
Right?
It's your own
Things that
show.
are not Bigfoot. Right? Because Dennis Martin, like Bigfoot's thrown under the bus because Bigfoot kidnapped and killed Dennis Martin, or the Dyatlov Pass, or
I think while
Albert Ostman in his story of weird Bigfoot.
good Lord, yes, in the backpack, right, or something like that.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
like,
I want to know more about Judith Frankel. Can you tell us about Judith Frankel?
Who?
An explosive ordeal of rape and revenge beyond any woman's experience. Remember that? You had that in one of your.
No.
You write so many articles there, Ben.
I think he's talking to me about my article on Bigfoot sex.
He did. He wrote an article on Bigfoot sex. Yes, the Radford Files, August of 2008. He had Bigfoot sex.
Yeah, to be honest, I haven't revisited that topic since 2008, so I'm a little fuzzy on it. But
Yeah, I know. We're not going to spend too much time on it. I just wanted to drop that in there.
But,
It's not everything you can say Bigfoot
but hey,
rape.
like Ben, you've seen, like, you know who Peter Kane is, right? Yeah. So there are people in the Bigfoot online community that will actually post Peter Kane's videos, like going, "Oh my God, did you guys know about this?" Right. So these are people who have just like obvious satire,
right,
goes right over their head, and you've seen like some of his like outlandish videos, I'm sure, dude, where he's like, he's milking things, he's eating things. I mean, it's like, it couldn't be more obvious, but yet,
Well, but by the same token, right? It couldn't be more obvious to me that Melba Ketchum's DNA stuff was a fiasco and full of shit. I'm not being sarcastic. It was genuinely clear to me, having a background in science and things like that, and yet I'm like, come on, man. And yet, and by the same token, I wouldn't say the Patterson Gimlin film is that obvious, but it sort of leans that way when you look at some of the surrounding context. But
so that being said, now I had a very good comment here from I think it's from Joe, Western New York Bigfoot Investigation Group. Is what do you say about these investigators that have this so-called evidence, but they're not willing to give it up to other people to analyze it? Right? You should let's say that I got a Bigfoot hand. I found a Bigfoot hand, but that's my Bigfoot hand, and I'm putting it in the freezer, and I'm not going to thaw it out. You can't see it, but you're going to have to trust me because it's my Bigfoot hand.
Right.
That's a huge red flag, right? Joe makes a great that any piece of evidence that's brought forth should be opened up to.
Yeah, I agree.
Anyone.
And I think you should pull up David Lester's comment to sort of go like down that road. Like, you have to debunk in order to make real finds more valid.
Absolutely. And that's one reason, and we can talk about the Skookum cast if you want, but that's I'll give you one quick that was an example where when the Skookum cast came up, this is the BFO Skookum cast, Bigfoot's butt print and all that. Yeah. Another example of a high profile case that several prominent Bigfoot experts authenticated, and it later fizzled to turn out to be almost certainly an elk wallow.
Now it was supposed to be reaching across to not get its
the whole
foot
thing
in
was
the mud, and
but here's the thing, right? And so again, I was writing for Discovery News at the time, and so I contacted Matt Moneymaker. I said, "Hey Matt, can I see the Skookum cast?" And he said, "No."
Your Bigfoot, your BFRO dues aren't up current, right?
Right. I'm like, why not? Right. I at the time was one of, if not the most prominent Bigfoot skeptics in the world. I'm not asking you to pay my airfare. I'm asking. You guys own it. Do I have permission if I go to see if I fly there to the next? Can I see it? He's like, no. I'm like, why not? This is and so finally I'm like, this is not how science works. Science doesn't work when you have some big piece of evidence. You're like, oh no, I'm not going to show it. Oh, look, we have no, not going to show it.
I think that's exactly what Joe's saying is like, you got Joe from Western New York Bigfoot Group. I think it is Joe. Is you're right. You have to be able to open up the floodgates and bring it right. Back up your claim.
Yeah, and that's the thing is that, and it's really the same thing with any skeptical argument, right? Is that if you present a claim to me and I can I can most likely debunk it or disprove it in some way, then we should both be happy with that, and it deserves to be disproven for your own good. That way, and just that way for the Bigfoot community, we can sort out what's bullshit and what's real, or at least take a good stab at it.
Yeah.
So my point here is that there's no legitimate, logical, scientific reason why someone wouldn't want to or be willing to share evidence with anybody, including and particularly, especially Bigfoot skeptics or even researchers like Todd Disotell.
Unless it's a hoax.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, unless it's a hoax, in which case it's like, well,
Jesus
bullshitters are not going to be transparent, right? I'm not going to tell you how I robbed the bank, I'm not going to tell the cops how I robbed the bank,
But here's the thing:
call a lawyer,
But here's the thing with the Skookum cast is that it later turned out to be bullshit. I mean, frankly, and we can debate.
No, that's fine. I'm
sure it did.
But
we've always been honest here, so
I care nothing about the Skookum cast.
Well, here's the thing: is that Matt Moneymaker wasn't. I mean, look, that was not a hoax, right? I have never claimed, and I don't think
identification
that the Skookum cast was a hoax. I think it was something that was just misunderstood. It was, and I mean, the whole thing was just laughable. I mean, it was, they went out into the woods and they were trying to, they set out bait for Bigfoot, and then they didn't have cameras that worked. And so I'm like, well, you set out bait and then you came back and something ate it, but you don't know what ate it. What are you doing? That's the whole point of setting out bait. If you set out bait, it's because you can trap or record what eats your bait. This is investigation 101, Jeff Meldrum. I mean, come on, guys. Shit.
No, I get it, and it's frustrating because there are people out there that are trying to do the yeoman's work on limited funds, right? There's not everybody has, $50,000 or $100,000 or a lot of money to do this research, and they don't have the camera coverage. But then these aren't the people coming forward making these bold claims, right? These are the people going, you know what? I got to try to figure this out, but they're not going to run to the History Channel, the Travel Channel, or to National Geographic or whatever. And go, look what we got, this huge Skookum cast.
Well, that's what I find so fascinating and so telling, frankly, about it was that the people that found the Skookum cast were not your local everyday, yokels, weekenders. These were literally among the top Bigfoot researchers in the world, and yet even they botched the job so badly. I mean, again, this wasn't your cousin's buddies out there drinking and looking for Bigfoot in the woods. These are people who that was their whole point.
They literally make a living.
They literally make a living at this, and they're failing spectacularly.
Now, that being said, and I don't want to put this all together because I don't want this to be summed into each other, but give us your thought on those nests that were found out on the Olympic Peninsula a couple years ago.
Yeah, I know. Well, I mean, to my mind, it's another example of the sort of quasi forensic evidence for Bigfoot, right? So you have the crop treetops, you have the branches, you have these nests, you have something that appears to have made a shelter nest or whatever else. And in some cases, there was even a case, I think, Ivan Bursky in Russia. I mean, there are several sort of different versions and variants of it, but in each case, you have something that it's unmistakably real, right? I mean, so like, for example, crop circles, right? Crop circles are real. You can see them, you can photograph them, you can document them. That's not the question. The question isn't, are crop circles real? The question is, what made them? Why are they there? Is it because of hoaxers? Is it because of aliens? Whatever else? And it's the same thing with Bigfoot nests and broken branches and treetops, stuff like that. So the question is, are these natural? Are these unnatural? Was it Bigfooters? Was it someone looking for shelter? What was it? And you would expect that if these really are locations that are frequented by some unknown primate or any unknown animal, there should be lots of evidence, DNA evidence around there. There should be
Piles of it.
Yeah, I mean, this is like that's what nests are.
Yeah.
A nest isn't just where some round thing somewhere. A nest is where some animal presumably has spent considerable amount of time. And when they do that, they eat, they shit, they do various other things. I'm not going to describe on the family broadcast.
Be giving birth in these freaking things, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
maybe there could be Bigfoot placenta.
Yeah.
There could
I
be
object.
Bigfoot
Speculation, Your Honor. That's
Okay.
speculation, Your Honor.
all right, go ahead. What leading question? What do you got there? Pat's crying because he believes in Bigfoot all the time.
No. I said I object. That's speculation, Your Honor.
Oh, speculation. All right.
Yes.
You're leading the witness.
Right. that it's a birthing area, right?
A birthing area.
Yeah.
But we see this all the time, right? I mean, I was funny for the recent piece when I was revisiting Melba Ketchum, not to circle back to her, but I was curious what she was doing recently, and there was a Twitter post from a couple years back where she repeated some news story about some hiker that had been found in a tree, or part of his body was in a tree. He's like, "Yeah, that's it." Well, we all know that Bigfoot kill people, put them in trees. I'm like, do we know that? I didn't know that, Melba.
Yeah, we filmed it, a dozen times. So of course we know that we filmed it.
Right.
They kill them and put them in trees.
Right. And again, it's part of the whole thing, right? Where and again, I don't mind speculations. Speculation is human. People love, what's possible, what could be if these are Bigfoot, whatever else. But at the same time, you have to draw a line between saying this is what we know about Bigfoot, and if Bigfoot are what I'm assuming it is, for example, an unknown hominid or whatever else, then they would, Bigfoot, what they eat, what they things like that. And so, for example, if you go, and I'm not picking on Melba because there's
it sounds like you are.
No. Well, take your pick.
I'm just kidding, Ben.
But again, it's the same thing with ghosts, right?
Yeah.
I'll pick up books by ghost hunters who will say, well, ghosts do this and that, and ghosts they have these properties, and they prefer darkness because this and this. I'm like, you don't know that you're making this up. I mean, it might be true, but it might not be true. And the same thing happens in Bigfootery, where you have people who are like, well, Bigfoot eat berries and they bury their dead. I'm like, what? If you want to say they might, or I speculate that, or it's possible that, go ahead. But to put out these blanket statements about what Bigfoot do, come on, you're not helping.
Well, again, that's general community and Bigfoot narrative. So people, I call it Bigfoot sauce.
Bigfoot sauce.
I like Kenny, your buddy,
the stew, the gumbo. What was it?
Oh, jambalaya or paella.
Paella. There you go. Bigfoot
paella. I call it Bigfoot sauce, which is what you smother over anything you want that is the Bigfoot narrative. You just smother that Bigfoot narrative. It's yummy. It's tasty. It's vinegary. It's like a good barbecue sauce,
But ultimately, it's not proof. Ultimately, it's not evidence. No. It's sauce.
So the entertainers, or the big voices, let's call them, smother stuff in Bigfoot sauce, and that Bigfoot and the gobblers gobble it up and then regurgitate it onto comments online where Bigfoot doesn't exist. You can't find it. Let's say Bigfoot's real, Ben. It's a real thing. It's undiscovered hominid, whatever. It doesn't exist online. You can't find it here. Wait, hold on. Let me hit Shift Control. Am I going to find Bigfoot? No.
Where's the reveal Bigfoot button?
Yeah, she still has an AOL account.
Yeah, so this phenomenon happens. It happens out here in the woods, out like in the middle of nowhere. It doesn't happen online. So Bigfoot sauce happens online. Therefore, there's your again. We're getting two different things going on here. There's kind of a disconnect. Yeah, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit of bullshitters in the Bigfoot world.
Yes. Right, and that's 100%. Not to be said. I want to make it very clear for the people that are watching the show, because a lot of the people tune in that are a lot of they're honest people that are out there. They enjoy the outdoors. They like to camp. They like to do investigations. They may have seen some stuff or may have heard some stuff that doesn't make a lot of sense to them, and they continue the adventure. Right? There's nothing wrong with that. right? There's nothing wrong with spending time outdoors and doing stuff and trying to solve the mystery of something that somebody's seen individual. It's when you take people that pretend to be experts and they spin things out of creativity for either their own self gain monetarily or attention, right? There's two different camps there, and I want to make sure very clear that we're not throwing all the Bigfoot people into one pot here.
Sure,
because I think that's whether we're talking about Bigfoot. Well, whether we're talking about Bigfoot, we can also talk about UFOs. We can talk about the missing. I got to talk to you about before we get off the show about America the Fearful. I really want to hear about that book. But whether you're talking about any unknown cryptid, any unsolved mystery, any ghost, any type of thing, I think it's all the same, Ben, right? We don't, right? It's skepticism.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately,
it's healthy.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that Bigfoot is, of course, just one of many cryptids, and there's the marquee monsters. There's Chupacabra, Nessie, Bigfoot, and there's sort of second tier. There's Lizard Man, Mothman, and so on. But at the end of the day, they're all the same. They're all of the same form because there are ambiguous sightings, there are ambiguous tracks. In many cases, there's this, that, and the other. What's lacking is hard evidence, and what fills that gap is typically eyewitness testimony, which unfortunately, and gonna get some hate mail for this, unfortunately, is generally not reliable. And I'm happy to discuss it, but it's just true. I mean, there's eyewitness.
Go down that road.
I want to jump in here real quick because I got a very important comment that our good friend Ken wanted to ask you, Ben, to encapsulate why conspiracy theories are silly.
Ooh, excellent. Hi, Ken.
There you go. Thanks, Ken, for tuning in.
I love Ken. He's a cool guy. I would also recommend his books, by the way.
Yes, I'm a big fan.
Why conspiracy theories are silly? Well, there's a couple reasons. One of them is that they're non-provable. They're non-disprovable as well. So they're what in science we call unfalsifiable. So what happens is that if somebody puts forth a conspiracy theory, then people who try and debunk or disprove parts of it, they're just considered to be part of the conspiracy. And so, and I've seen this personally, right? Where someone,
you're right.
Someone puts out some conspiracy, the Roswell crash, whatever else. And so it's like when you offer evidence, like, well, that's what they want you to think. Well, so then the question is, okay, all right, Mr. Conspiracy believer.
It's like flat Earth.
Yeah, it's like what would you tell them if you're just going to dismiss the wave everything I say as part of the conspiracy, I'm just part of the sheeple, then you tell me what you would accept as evidence that disproves it. And usually they hadn't even thought about it. I'll give you another quick example. I was at Dragon Con a couple years back, and I was doing a panel on conspiracies, and a guy stood up during the Q&A, and he was clearly a truther. I mean, I knew this right away.
Why? Whoa. Why in the hell were you doing a panel on conspiracies at Dragon Con? If you could just touch on that real quick.
Sure. So Dragon Con, for those who don't know, is this big, massive nerd
which
fest.
Is everybody.
Generally lovingly.
Yeah, but it's like Star Wars and Star Trek and Marvel.
It's everything. It's Harry Potter. It's Star Wars.
Right.
There's
all right, so go ahead, Ben. Tell the story.
There's D&D players. The only thing they're short of is hygiene. But usually by the second or third day, it's all good. But the reason to answer your question is that I actually co-founded the Skeptics track there, along with Derek Colanduno. So I co-founded the one of the track, and it was actually an offshoot of the X-Files track. So somebody said, "Hey, why not bring some skeptics on?" So anyway, that's why I was there.
All right.
And so I was chairing the panel on conspiracies, and this guy gets up on 9/11. And he starts, I'm like, fine, whatever. So, get up and hand him the mic. And he's like, so 9/11. I'm like, all right. And then he starts talking, like, hold on just a second. So I said, sir, you have the mic. So tell us what happened on 9/11. And he's like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, you're putting forth that the official version is wrong. And there's all these reasons why it didn't happen. So you tell us, you have the entire room, you have a microphone, tell us what happened on 9/11. He's like, well, you have to look at the money. I'm like, no, you don't. I'm asking a very simple question, and you have the floor. I'm not being sarcastic. you say that the official story is wrong. Tell us what happened. Who did what? Well, we don't really know. I'm like, you don't know. You just told us you don't know. So that sort of goes back to answer one of Ken's question,
right,
as to why conspiracy theories are silly. Is that typically the arguments are sort of arguments from ignorance. They're sort of arguments from the gaps. So instead of someone saying, this is what happened on 9/11, or this is what happened on Roswell, or JFK or moon landing, instead of doing that, typically they will just sort of poke holes in what they consider to be the official story. So I say, well, here's the official story, but in this case, this guy, he says something different in an interview, and so it's this sort of like cherry picking
and connecting dots.
And I'm like, okay, well, even if all that's true, let's just assume that's all true. What is the actual story? And usually they got nothing.
Okay, so I got a perfect follow-up for that, and I'd like to see if this falls into the line of, speaking of conspiracy theories, I'm sure both of you are familiar, I'm sure all the viewers are familiar with the Mount St. Helens eruption, Sasquatch being killed and carried off by the military conspiracy. Are you familiar with that one?
Yeah.
I know a little bit about it. I'd heard some. He's more familiar with it than I am.
Fill Ben in and see what Ben just in broad strokes.
How am I going to fill Ben in other than, hey Ben, it's a real event that happened in this world. Mount St. Helens blew up.
I heard about that.
Right, that happened.
Thing. Alex Jones says it's a false flag.
All right. Screw that road. Mount St. Helens blew up. Take the real event, smother it in Bigfoot sauce, and go.
Supposedly there was a bunch of burnt, injured Bigfoot that the military airlifted out, and there was always the forest ranger that saw it, but the forest ranger isn't available for comment because he died of cancer. But no, somebody was there.
Or was it?
Yeah,
because people don't die of cancer.
They don't.
Well, but it's the same principle, right? It's like, and this is something I've tried to explain to people. It's like after any natural disaster, the hurricanes, for example, in Florida, or Hurricane Katrina, droughts, right? I mean, much of the U.S. is in drought. There are cattle that are dying as I'm speaking, and other animals that don't have enough water to survive, right? There's no logical reason why that wouldn't include Bigfoot. So anytime you see some natural disaster, hurricane, flooding, take your pick. If Bigfoot are said to exist in that area, and Bigfoot sightings have been all across the country, then there's no logical reason why sooner or later someone shouldn't find a dead Bigfoot along with the million other dead animals that happen to be in the path of this disaster.
Well, look at the forest fires out in Washington State and California, right? Hundreds and thousands of acres burn each year out there, right? And you would think that happened. We are fast approaching the hour here, so I want to keep things moving. I don't want to get too far down. That we are full of rabbit holes here, so I want to keep things moving. Let's talk.
Moving.
All right, so technology, right? So technology. Do you put a lot of what is your credence as far as, do you think technology would help solve the Bigfoot thing coming down the road?
I think it certainly could. I mean, insofar as
eDNA. Let's talk about eDNA.
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean,
anything. Talk about anything. Technology.
We had a question here. So
we are in a time when we're actually solving crimes and identifying people that committed crimes who have been long since dead. Through, I mean, the Golden State Killer was one example that Patton Oswalt's wife wrote about. Every day you read in the paper about new cases where cold cases come up and someone searches a data bank and they find this. So if Bigfoot are real, there's no reason in the world that I can see why they wouldn't be a useful tool to identify what they are. And that's especially true because if you have something that is a good enough sample, and as you guys know, this is one of the problems with DNA evidence, is that it's easily degraded. It can be degraded by heat, light, any number of things. And so the samples that the doctors take are in a sterile environment and they're uncontaminated, and you can get something out of that. A lot of the samples that, for example, Melba Ketchum used were contaminated. They were from all sorts of people. There was no protocols for collecting samples. It was a scientific mess. So if they're collected by people who know what they're doing, and the samples are good enough, then you could do something with it. That being said, at some point you need to, particularly with morphological things, you need something to compare it to, right? And this is one of the problems with DNA evidence, is that if someone says this is a Bigfoot hair, or this is a Bigfoot tooth, or whatever else, the question is, what are you comparing it to?
There you go.
Okay,
there's no known samples.
To give you an example, just real quick here, Pat, I had Todd Dishotel on a couple months ago, and Todd Dishotel, Amherst, University of Amherst, and they do a lot. He works on the cutting edge of DNA technology, and they have, I think he was mentioning something, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he was able to take an air sample at the zoo, and he was able to not only identify certain animals that lived in the cages around there, but certain types of people, as far as African American, Puerto Rican. It was amazing that and of course that technology is very, very expensive at this point. It's in its infancy. But that being said, like you said, if you can't have something to compare it against, are they taking all these these alleged hairs and putting them in a folder somewhere and going, okay, it looks like this? I mean, if you can't compare an apple to an apple, right? How is that apple not an orange when this comes to Bigfoot?
Right, and you saw this, like Grover Krantz wrote about this in one of his books. He talked about, there was alleged Bigfoot hairs that turned out to be carpet fibers.
Right, yeah.
And again, it's not that there's necessarily the thing. It's so easy to hoax these things. It's so easy to get a wig fiber and just sort of say, yeah, I was out hiking in the woods and this is it. And even if someone does the time and the effort to do the sequencing and find out what is it synthetic, is it real, whatever else, and that, again, that, as you point out, that takes time, that costs money. Even when somebody does that and it turns out to be a hoax and somebody spent 2 weeks and $8,000 doing it, they're like, well, don't blame me, somebody must have thrown a wig out there, I don't know.
Try 80, more like $80,000.
Yeah, it's just,
So I mean, eDNA is cutting edge technology. It completely escapes any casual person in the Bigfoot world, and I don't even understand it. The three of us don't fully understand it. You really have to. I've reached out to eDNA specialists. They literally email me back, like people in France.
Well, that's why Todd Dishotel, I had him on the show, and he was very, he's part of that group that understands all that
they
stuff.
Email me back going, I don't have time to talk to you about eDNA. I got
I got a Bigfoot sample here I got to run.
No, I've got real work I'm trying to do here.
Well, and I'm glad that you mentioned Todd Dishotel, because in some ways, his participation kind of undermines one of the arguments that I often hear, which is that scientists won't take Bigfoot evidence seriously. Todd is one perfect example, and I quoted Todd, and in fact, I quote him in my Chupacabra book because he sequenced some alleged Chupacabra stuff. And so, and again, I hear this over and over and over and over and over again, that, the reason that Bigfoot isn't been proven, or the reason that this, and that, and the other, is that scientists are refusing, they got their fingers in their ears and they're refusing to look at the evidence. No, that's factually not true. The problem is that when people do present the evidence, and Todd is one example of several who have done this sort of work, it turns out to be known animals or so degraded they can't get anything about it.
Sure.
And so again, it's just, I don't mean to harp on it, but I hear this over and over again, that they're blaming scientists for refusing to look at evidence. And I don't think that's true. I mean, it may have been true at one point, but certainly and if people want to contact me, I'll direct you to somebody who might analyze your stuff. But keep in mind that as Pat pointed out, a lot of these analyses, these take time, these take money,
It costs money. It costs money to do real science and have real professionals who are not, Bigfoot on the brain people, right? So if you want all these scientists who are not Bigfoot on the brain people to come do their science, man, that costs money.
It
Like,
does, and keep in mind that
it's not happening. It's not going to happen.
Even decades ago, like Tom Slick, right? Tom Slick,
good old Tom Slick.
right? I mean, so that's an example. I don't want to go too far down that road, but when people tell me, well, millionaires, rich people aren't putting money into finding Bigfoot. Yeah, they are.
Tom Slick loved it. He loved it. It was a shame he passed away much too early to spend more of his money.
So that's a philanthropist putting their money into the wrong people. Philanthropist.
Yeah.
Putting their money into the wrong people. And that's happened, I don't know, 2 or 3 times in the Bigfoot world. I mean, that's not a common thing.
It's not. But I mean, again, it's a case of where, again, I'm not suggesting that the Bigfoot research industry is well funded, because of course it's not. I mean, my Chupacabra research, I did all that on my own time and my own dime over 5 years. Nobody was funding my Chupacabra research and my book. I did it just because I love to do it and I wanted to solve a mystery. So I didn't. So my point here is that the lack of some angel investor throwing money at me to do the research didn't prevent me from solving the mystery, and it shouldn't prevent you guys from doing the same if you want to go out and look for Bigfoot.
Yeah, well, I mean, the whole point is, why doesn't eDNA? Because eDNA is cutting edge technology. Those scientists don't care about Bigfoot community begging them to come do it. They're just not going to do it. Well, they're not. They're out there looking for different things. They're testing.
But the thing is, the technology is there. I mean, so you don't have to beg some eDNA expert to do it.
It sounded like Pat got hung up on by some scientist out in France, and he's still pissed off about it.
It does sound like that too. Yeah, he yelled.
I don't know. I mean,
pissed about it.
Moving ahead. Hey.
Who can make an eDNA study happen here?
Mike Merchant's got a great thing here, and we were talking about this slightly before the show there, is he says, funny thing about eyewitnesses who have seen these creatures really don't need any of the DNA evidence. They've seen stuff during the daylight or whatever. They've had thousands of honest, credible eyewitnesses that aren't all lying, and they're not all crazy and confused. So this goes back to the eyewitness stuff. I mean, Mike Merchant makes a perfectly good point here. Is not everybody's fucking crazy, and not everybody's seen bears, and not everybody's,
Yeah, it becomes a percentage game,
right? So, so what do you say about that, Ben?
Right. No, I would agree that not all eyewitnesses are lying, crazy, or confused. I absolutely agree with that. The logical error here is that there are other categories. So it's not that someone is confused. It's not that someone's necessarily lying. So, for example, if someone sees some large unknown creature or animal, presumably animal, at some distance in woods, and they can't identify it, that doesn't mean it's Bigfoot. What it means is that is a large, unidentifiable, hairy animal in the woods. So, so in that case, they're not confused. No one's claiming they're confused. No one's claiming they're crazy, nor are they lying.
It sounds like confusion to me. That sounds like confusion to me.
No, I don't think it's confusion at all, because keep in mind, let me go back to psychology for a second, right? So there is a series of steps between somebody seeing something and someone reporting something. So just psychologically and cognitively. So the first thing is that somebody has to notice something. And we don't always notice things that you would expect people to notice. The other day, I took a different route to go to my local grocery store, and there was a Starbucks there.
Oh, I thought you were going to say you saw Bigfoot.
No, this was a Starbucks. There are far more Starbucks than Bigfoot out there, let me tell you.
That's true.
And I'm like, and I had never seen it before. And I'm like, I've driven, I mean, I don't drive it every day, but I'm like, and clearly it wasn't just freshly opened. It had been around for a while. I'm like, how could I have driven this route? Not every day, but over the course of, and I'd never noticed it before. Well, again, I wasn't confused. I knew where I was. I just hadn't noticed that particular thing, because when I was driving that route, I was looking at traffic or watching
your phone.
Right. So that's part of the answer is, number one, you have to pay attention to it. We don't always pay attention to it. Then you have to try and interpret it and try to say, okay, what's going on? And people get And again, it's not a matter of confusion; it's a matter of limited information. And I come across this all the time in ghost investigations. I talk to people who swear up and down they saw a ghost, and I'll say, okay, I'm not saying you didn't see a ghost. Tell me what you saw and why do you think it's a ghost? And they'll say, well, I saw something out of the corner of my eye and it was down the hallway. I'm like, okay, well, something out of your corner of your eye down the hallway isn't necessarily a ghost. It might be, but there's some reason why you put that label on it. And the same process happens with Bigfoot and lake monster sightings and other sightings. So there's a whole series that you have to pay attention to it. You have to recognize it. And then when it comes, then the other part of it is trying to translate that into something else. So it's possible that it's not just possible when someone sees something and someone else says, "What did you see? You were there. To describe what you said." People don't always have the words to describe it, so they may sort of unintentionally they exaggerate things. So, for example, eyewitnesses tend to overestimate the size of things that surprise them. Whether it's a lake monster or whatever it is, if something shocks somebody, and again, there's research on this, they report it being bigger than it actually was and scarier. So the implication here is that somebody might see something, if it frightens them coming out of the shrubbery, they may remember it and genuinely interpret it. Again, no confusion. They're not confused. That's how they interpreted it. They interpreted it as being bigger and darker and scarier than it was because they were frightened. So my point here.
Okay, so how do you explain? And there's a huge chunk in the anecdotal body. How do you explain somebody who says they saw an 8-foot tall monkey man with 4-foot wide shoulders, bipedal, standing right in front of them, 20 feet? How do you explain that with anything that you just laid out?
Well, there's a couple questions I would have. Is number one, how do you know it was 4 feet wide? And again, I'm not being sarcastic.
Okay, I'm ballparking. 3.5.
Okay, don't Pat. Let's not argue. Let's give him a chance to answer the question.
No. I'm.
Give him a chance to answer the question.
I just want to clarify that I'm ballparking.
Sure. Okay.
3.5 feet wide.
No, that's fine, right? So if we're ballparking, then of course there's a margin of error, right?
Right.
So if there's a margin of error,
3 feet, not 2 feet, not 3 feet.
Well, right. Again, I don't know. I can't.
You don't know the difference between 2 feet and like a 3-foot margin and like a 6-inch margin?
Well, I mean, I'll give you one example. So, and this is slightly off, but basically, so in the lake monster research I did on Champ, I'm
not talking about lake monsters.
But it's relevant here.
Monkey man.
It's relevant here
because, let him finish. Let him finish,
because
please.
The most famous photograph of that lake monster was taken by Sandra Mancy, and she estimated that the head and neck came up out of the water, 5-6 feet high, and in fact, when you actually measured it, you realize it's much shorter than that. So my point here is that, and again, this gets back to what I was saying before, is that people exaggerate and people overestimate things. So I mean, at the end of the day, if someone says to me, "Look, it was right in front of me. I had this big description about it, and it's all very detailed," then I don't know what to tell you. I wasn't there. I will tell you this, is that it's not my job as an investigator to debunk or disprove what they're saying. It's their job to prove what they are saying. And so, what was it? I don't know, and they don't either. So again, I mean, and
I'm not off your
okay. So I think a better question, honestly, because again, I love all the people in the chat. Is I think a better question for me to you, Ben, and this is not only with Bigfoot, but let's use Bigfoot as an example. Okay,
sure.
Okay, what evidence besides a corpse would be good enough evidence for you?
Well, of course, a corpse would be ideal. If we had something, a part of a corpse, teeth, bones, hair that was not degraded, that was shown to be and repeated and replicable. So, in other words, somebody does a DNA sequencing on it, and it's independently verified by an independent laboratory who also does this, and this comes back as saying, this is, if it's unknown, but the reason, if it's unknown, but it's not unknown because it's degraded, that's one thing. Right. Typically what happens, particularly in genetic evidence, is that it comes back unknown because it's too degraded. It's not that we know what it is. It's not that the sample is quality and it's unknown. It's the sample is shit and we can't tell a thing about it. So that's an important distinction to make, and that goes back to your question. So there's lots of other things like that, and again, particularly with Bigfoot evidence, there's no reason in the world that I can see, and feel free to argue otherwise, why we shouldn't at this point in 2022 have some forensic evidence, teeth, bones, hair, something like that. And keep in mind, and you guys know this, but I'll just repeat this because it bears repeating. We're not talking about one Bigfoot.
Right.
The estimates are there would have to be, last time I was looking it up, between 6,000 and 10,000 of them in North America alone. 6,000 to 10,000 in North America. So out of those 6,000 to 10,000, this is for a breeding population. So the problem is not that we're only finding 6 Bigfoot and we would expect 60,000. The problem is not that we're only finding 3 or 2. We're not even finding 1. Surely at some point some of them would die of old age. They would die of disease. They would be hit by a trucker on a freeway. At some point, we should find one.
It is a sad fact that is true, but that is true. And I'm going to light the torch here right now and say that. So, on a scale of 1 to 10, eyewitness accounts for Bigfoot, what do you give? You can be honest here. Piss everybody off. I don't care. I'm interviewing you. On a scale of 1 to 10, what do you give a person that walks up to you and gives you an eyewitness account of a Bigfoot? How much credibility would you give that?
That's a fair question. And I'm not trying to be evasive, but it depends on what you do with that. So if somebody comes up to me and says, "Hey, let me tell you about my Bigfoot experience. It was 5 years ago, and I was hiking in the Rockies, and I can tell you about where it was. I was about 2 miles off this one trail, and I saw this big hairy thing, and it was broad daylight, and it wasn't a moose, it wasn't anything else." I would give that a 2 or a 3. If, on the other hand, someone says, "I had that experience, and but it wasn't 5 years ago, it was yesterday, and we can go there, and I can show you where it was," that's a lot better. So this is
what do you think you will find?
Well, you don't know if you don't look, right? And so here's the thing.
Sure, but that'll never happen to you.
You don't know. I mean, he travels all over the fucking world for a living doing this, so you never know.
Well, look, I mean, here's the thing: is that
I think I'm being pretty realistic.
Look, a sighting by itself it's like a photograph, right? It's a 2-dimensional image, but of course, at least in a photograph, other people can see it and whatever else. But if it's just a sighting, and again, it depends on the lighting conditions, depends on lots of different things. But a sighting by itself is never going to prove the existence of Bigfoot.
I agree with that. It's not evidence.
No. But I would say it is potentially evidence. If, for example, again, if someone says to me, and I investigated, I'll give you one quick example. I investigated.
We got to wrap this up here because so go ahead.
No. I'll make it real quick.
Oh, you got time, but I want to get into a couple more things.
No, that's fine. So I investigated.
We're really on to something here.
I investigated a case. I think it was Matt Moneymaker or Cliff Crook, one of the two. He was in Western New York, and I was living in Western New York at the time. And there was a sighting not too far from where I was in Buffalo. And he claimed there was a guy that had this Bigfoot sighting, and he went out there and he made the local news and made sure he was on camera, this and that. And when Joe, Nickel, and I went there, we asked them, it's like, "Oh, where was this sighting?" And it was across this field. And it was barbed wire, so it was actually on someone else's property, and there was like a small marsh there. And so and we asked the eyewitness, like, "Oh, again, is this where the Bigfoot was?" He says, "Yeah, it was just over there, and it crossed these trees." So Joe and I crossed the fence. Technically, we trespassed. Don't tell anybody. And we went over to where it was, and there were no footprints anywhere. again, this is a wet area. And I mean, I didn't spend all day there. We spent probably at least an hour in there looking where the eyewitness had said there were. And believe me, had we seen some evidence of some unusual tracks, Bigfoot, whatever else, I'd be jumping up and down. I'd be calling the press. I'd be taking casts and so on. So again, it depends on. So it's not that eyewitness sightings by themselves are worthless. It's that they have very, very limited value unless they lead to something else.
I agree. I agree with you on that. That they have to be memory, human nature. Memories kind of fade over time, and things get exaggerated. Now we're not talking Bigfoot. We're talking life in general. That's just the way the brain works sometimes. But like you said, if you're able to go, okay, fortunately, let's go someplace and let's see if we can find out what it was like, and it's fresh in your memory. Right. That's, look at what the police do all the time. They always take people back to the crime scene or back to where the accident happened or whatever to try to get there. Here we are. We're right here now. Let's walk us through it.
Well,
Exactly.
you can make fun of Matt Moneymaker all you want, and I'll jump in on those jokes. But to be honest with you, that guy started that back in the late 90s.
And he's probably really rich by now.
He's Moneymaker after all, right?
No. I mean, Matt Moneymaker actually started the organization to go do the as fresh as it can possibly be of a Bigfoot sighting.
You're right. And I can tell you in the few cases where I have followed up on the BFRO's sighting reports, I have been very, very underwhelmed. I don't have time to get into them now, but there's been a couple cases where there's actually a case in northern New Mexico where I live. And that's why it sort of perked up my ears because I was interested in it. And I looked up the case, and it was actually available online. And I looked into it, and there were all sorts of holes in it. And this was being held up as, I forgot what it was, like Class A or something, but it was being held up as like a quality sighting. And I'm looking at this, I'm like, this is garbage. There's all sorts of problems here. It was a firefighter and just. And it was interesting to me because if I just happened to pick this one case because it was local to me, and I happened to dig into this one case and it fell apart within 20 minutes of me reading it, how many other cases are equally garbage? And
well, I don't know. You have to mathematically put that up against the 5,000 reports that are on there.
Well, right, and again, I'm not saying that they're all garbage. I'm just saying that it's interesting to me. I'll put this diplomatically. It's interesting to me.
It's a little late for that now, Ben.
It's interesting to me
sailed
that it just so happens that the few cases of the BFROs that have been touted as good evidence I've seen glaring errors. And lack of follow-up and all sorts of other problems. But anyway.
And again, I mean, that's why we had you on the show. And that's why I invited you on the shows because, we have a lot of, this is a From Behind Tall Trees. It's a Bigfoot-centered show. And a lot of times we have some people that just have investigators on and it's the same conversation over and over again, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. But I feel for me to do due diligence with this and not be completely poured out of my skull sometimes is you have to present the other side of the fence. And I really appreciate you guys coming on. Ben, I can't thank you for coming on enough. We promised you be out of here in 90 minutes and we're going to wrap this up now. What do you have? You've been, you've got your books, you got like 600 books out. What do you got? What do you, well, you got, what do you got going on right now? What's going on with you for the rest of 2022 into 23?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I appreciate it. I actually have a new book out titled America the Fearful, and it is a big departure from my normal stuff. So as you mentioned, I'm known for my research into cryptozoology and ghosts and urban legends, this and that. Yeah. This is actually a throwback to media literacy. And so in my book, America the Fearful, I talk about how fear is used by politicians and activists and advertisers and things like that. And sort of some of the ways that we can identify fear and the role that it plays in pop culture and basically scaring people. So that's my latest book. It came out a couple months back. People should check it out. I also have a podcast called Squaring the Strange, which we're now in our 5th year.
I love that show. It covers everything from politics to God knows what, everything.
Yes, thank you. I'm glad you like it. Our most recent episode is on penis theft. So if you've ever heard,
What? You had me at penis
yeah,
theft.
it's literally there. So
Everybody just stopped,
Oh
right? They
my
went,
God.
what?
like, what
Is
did they
that,
say?
where is
Yes,
that? Where does that
Touch-
link?
Can you
Is that
touch on that penis
YouTube?
theft real quick?
Is that on YouTube, Ben?
No, it's not on YouTube. It's you can find it on iTunes,
Spotify,
listen.
stuff like that, right?
Or
Yeah.
the podcast.
Yeah, so doing that. And
Wait. Go back and tell us what's going on with the penis theft. Real
Oh,
quick.
he wants to talk about the dick theft.
Oh no,
Okay.
no, it's all right.
No. I'll give you the 10-cent tour. So basically, it's a culture bound syndrome called KORO, KORO, and it's most prevalent in India and in sub-Saharan Africa, and in Polynesia, and in these cases, usually men, sometimes women, believe that their genitals have been stolen or are shrinking. And so there will be accusations, and there's cases in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, in West Africa, where people will accuse other people of stealing their penises. It's a weird story, but there's and somebody asked me, is there truth to it? Well, there's truth to the belief in it. So are the organs actually stolen? No. Do people believe they're stolen? Yes. And so it sort of walks that line between social delusion and psychology and frankly witness testimony.
Boy, nothing's off limits with you, is it? Is there?
You know, we
flat earth stuff.
This is the thing that I love about I've been very fortunate in my career over the last 20 some years to be able to research, investigate topics that interest me personally. So chupacabras, evil clowns, ghosts, whatever else, urban legends, because I love this stuff. And so I have a passion for it. And so I've just been fortunate that I work for an organization, even though it's a nonprofit, I don't make any money. I enjoy doing it, and I love the investigation, and I love talking about it. So thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no, but now do you get like hate mail? Do you have people that really have a problem with you? Because I enjoyed the conversation, but I can see somebody taking your scientific, very straight analytical mind and going, this guy's really pissing me off because he's not believing anything I'm saying. Do you get some people that get upset with your stance?
Yes, I occasionally get hate mail. I've gotten a couple death threats over the years. Usually, it's from people who are upset about something I wrote about conspiracy theories. So the conspiracy people are especially
I
get some pissy emails from Bigfoot believers and ghost hunters, but the real venom, the real hardcore scary people are the people who I've debunked some conspiracy that they hold dear, and I'm part of the problem and this and that. But
you talk about cherished belief, man. Ooh.
Yeah, I mean those are some scary folks. But in general, I mean it's a case of where when people talk to me and they realize that I'm not being obnoxious, I'm genuinely trying to understand and have a conversation. Oftentimes they're like, all right, well, whatever, we can discuss this. So usually it's people who either haven't read what I've written, or they just sort of assume that all skeptics are mean assholes,
right?
And nothing I say is going to change their mind. So I'm like, well, sorry, but I actually a friend of mine, a comic named Ian Harris. He does impersonations, and so one of the occasional segments on my show on Square and the Strange is hate mail read by different celebrities. So I got like my hate mail read by Robert De Niro, for example, or Christopher Walken. So that's great.
Well, listen, awesome. Be safe out there, and you got to promise to come back on. Pat Turner, always a pleasure to have you on, bud. It's never a dull moment when Pat Turner's around. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart, Pat. I know you like to talk for 2 or 3 hours because we have a ton to talk about, but that's why we're going to have him back. We're going to have Ben back next.
I'll be happy to go. I'm going to be out of commission for a month or two, but after the first of the year, let's circle back and we'll do it.
All right, everybody. Thank for everybody that lit up the chat tonight. Mike Merchant, Tall Ones. You got Kenny Irish. I think you got who else is in there? Whole bunch of people.
Yeah, man. You're
you got
your bud
Odines
Kenny.
there. You got Kenny Biddle. You got Curious Cryptids, Lockbeard, Dave Lester. Everybody, thanks for showing up and really lighting up the chat. That's what it's for, dude. Is to poke the bear and let's get this thing going, right? If you can't have a conversation, right, poke that fucking bear.
There you go, man. This
I'm all about poking. Let's poke.
All right, folks. Have a good night. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on From Behind Tall Trees.
You've been watching From Behind Tall Trees, a Catskill Appalachian Research Collective production. For more information on this program and others like it, remember to like, share, and subscribe to CARC Universal today. To join the conversation on our Facebook group, become a member of the Catskill Appalachian Research Collective Facebook group. CARC. Relentless.